What if the very thing we've been told to fear is actually the path to our greatest strength? We spend much of our lives armoring up, hiding our wounds, masking our doubts, rehearsing smiles that don't quite reach the soul. In a world that celebrates performance over presence, silence over sincerity, we're taught, sometimes directly, more often quietly, that vulnerability is dangerous, that opening your heart is a liability, that revealing your truth makes you soft, even weak. But what if that's a lie? What if vulnerability isn't weakness at all, but the highest form of courage, the most sacred kind of power? Pause for a second. Ask yourself, when was the last time you showed someone who you really are, not who you think they need you to be, not who you are when you're guarded, polished, or proud, but who you are underneath the noise? Most of us can count those moments on one hand, and yet, they are the very moments we remember forever. The ones that connect us, heal us, reveal us. You see, the ancient Stoics, those warriors of the mind and soul, understood something we've forgotten. They knew that the truest form of strength isn't dominance, but discipline. It isn't hiding your pain, but holding it with honor. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who carried the weight of an empire on his back, wrote not to boast, but to stay sane. He bled in ink. He wrote of grief, of self-doubt, of fear, because he knew what we refuse to feel, we can never transform. And that's what this video is about. Today, we're going to strip back the noise. We're going to explore vulnerability, not as a performance, but as a practice. A daily discipline that brings depth to our relationships, integrity to our choices, and clarity to our inner world. This isn't another video telling you to just be yourself. This is a journey through the fire, a reintroduction to your courage, a stoic approach to intimacy, rooted in presence, tempered by wisdom, and powered by truth. If you've ever felt like you were too much or not enough, if you've ever wondered why people don't really see you, if you've been afraid to speak the truth of your heart, for fear it would cost you everything, then you're exactly where you need to be. So take a breath. Stay with me. And if this resonates, if you find even a flicker of your truth in these words, consider liking this video, subscribing to Stoic Now, and sharing this message with someone whose soul deserves to feel seen. Because what we're about to step into might just change how you love, how you lead, and how you live. Let's begin. Number 1. The hidden courage behind vulnerability. We tend to equate vulnerability with exposure, an open wound, a risk, and for good reason. Exposing the most tender parts of ourselves, especially in a world that often rewards pretense and punishes sincerity, can feel like walking barefoot through fire. But what if we've misunderstood the nature of that fire? The Stoics, men of action, of thought, of silence, did not flinch at the reality of pain, nor did they cower before emotional depth. In fact, they revered it. To them, courage wasn't simply facing an army or enduring a physical trial. Real courage was facing your own soul without turning away. Vulnerability, then, is not weakness, it is confrontation. A confrontation with the self. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it. And it is in your power to wipe out this judgment now." Replace external thing with emotional exposure, and the message becomes even more profound. What makes vulnerability feel terrifying is not the act itself, it's our judgment of that act. We tell ourselves stories. If they see me cry, they'll think I'm unstable. If I speak my truth, they'll leave. If I admit I'm afraid, I'll be seen as less of a man. These stories don't come from strength. They come from fear. But fear, the Stoics remind us, is not to be obeyed. It is to be observed and then guided. Seneca once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." So much of our resistance to vulnerability lives in anticipation, not actuality. We imagine rejection. We imagine humiliation. But rarely do we ask, what might I gain if I dared to be real? This reframing is essential. Vulnerability is not the shedding of armor because we are weak, but because we are strong enough to know we no longer need it. It is not screaming our story to the world, hoping someone will validate our pain. It is standing in that story, calmly, saying, "This is what is true for me." No performance, no pity, just presence. The Stoics believed in truth above all else. To live in alignment with nature was to live in alignment with reason. And what is reason? if not seeing ourselves clearly and living without self-deception? Emotional truth is a vital part of that clarity. To repress what you feel, to hide what is real, is to live in distortion. And no man, no matter how accomplished, can build a life of peace on a foundation of distortion. Consider a modern example. Imagine a father who never speaks about his anxiety, his guilt, or the pressures he faces. He believes silence is strength. He tells himself his family needs him to be the rock. But in time, his silence becomes a wall. His children grow up not knowing how to share their own pain, not because they weren't loved, but because they never saw love expressed through truth. His wife wonders why she feels distant from the man she once called her best friend, not because he failed her, but because he hid from her. Now imagine if he sat down one evening and said, "I'm scared. I don't always know what I'm doing, but I want to get better. I want to be open with you, even when it's uncomfortable." That's vulnerability, and that is power. This shift doesn't come easy. Most of us have years, sometimes decades, of conditioning to unlearn. We've been taught to equate silence with dignity, toughness with isolation, leadership with stoicism, not realizing that true stoicism isn't about muting emotion, but mastering it. Epictetus did not teach us to bury pain. He taught us to meet it with reason, to learn from it, and to remain unmoved by fear, not untouched by it. When you choose vulnerability, you're not giving up control. You're exercising the highest form of it. You're choosing to direct your emotional truth instead of letting fear dictate your silence. Vulnerability, in the Stoic Lens, is not about being seen by everyone. It's about no longer hiding from yourself. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop hiding from yourself, others stop running from you. Your presence becomes more grounded, your relationships more honest, your connection more real. People trust those who are self-aware. People feel safe around those who don't pretend. Vulnerability doesn't push others away. It pulls the right ones closer. This is the courage Marcus wrote about in the quiet of night, when Rome slept and his thoughts burned onto parchment. This is the strength Epictetus taught his students, not in shouting, but in standing still. And this is the practice now laid before you. To be vulnerable, not because the world asks it, but because your soul requires it. So the next time your voice shakes as you speak what's real, or your eyes well up with something deeper than words, don't shrink. Don't retreat. Recognize that moment for what it is. A quiet victory. The ancient world may not have had our language for emotions, but it knew their weight, and it honored the men who bore them openly, with courage, with clarity, and above all, with love. Number 2, the armor we inherit. Why vulnerability terrifies us. There's a silence that creeps in long before the words fail. A stillness that wraps itself around the heart when you're about to speak something real, but your mouth goes dry, your mind races, and the moment slips away. That hesitation is not random. It is learned. It is layered. And it lives inside nearly all of us. You weren't born afraid of vulnerability. As a child, you didn't hesitate to cry when you were hurt or reach out when you needed warmth. Somewhere along the way, though, maybe in a harsh home, a schoolyard humiliation, a breakup that cut too deep, you learned that showing yourself came with consequences. So you adapted. You put on armor, not out of malice, but out of necessity. And over time, that armor became second skin. The Stoics understood this human condition well. They observed the mind not as a battlefield to dominate, but as a terrain to understand. Epictetus taught that we are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the judgments we place upon them. Vulnerability becomes terrifying not because it's inherently dangerous, but because of the meanings we've assigned to it. We've been taught that being seen in our fullness is risky, that people will leave if they see our flaws, that we must earn love by being strong, by being silent, by being together at all times. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if love isn't earned through perfection, but through presence, through honesty, through the willingness to stand there, soul uncloaked, and say, "Here I am, as I truly am." Modern psychology affirms what the Stoics intuited centuries ago. The fear of vulnerability is largely tied to shame, an emotion that tells us we are unworthy of connection. According to Brené Brown, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. When you've internalized shame, Vulnerability feels like a spotlight on everything you've spent years trying to hide. And yet, here's the paradox. The more we hide, the more we fear being seen. The more we pretend, the more we feel alone. It is not vulnerability that isolates us. It's the fear of it. The Stoics never told us to eliminate fear entirely, but to understand its root, to examine it, to dismantle it with reason. Seneca, in his wisdom, warned against imaginary sufferings. We are more often frightened than hurt, he said, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. That is the architecture of emotional repression, a mind that constantly prepares for rejection that has not yet occurred. You silence yourself to avoid being abandoned, and yet, in doing so, you abandon yourself first. I once met a man, we'll call him Darren, who had built his life like a fortress. He was successful by all appearances, composed, charismatic, a leader in his field, but his relationships? Fragile. Repeatedly, women told him they felt disconnected, that he never really let them in, and he couldn't understand why. I'm steady, he told me. I don't lose control. Isn't that what people want? But steadiness without softness is not intimacy. It's isolation in disguise. What he thought was leadership was actually self-protection. What he called strength was, in part, a refusal to feel. And once he realized that, the walls began to fall, not all at once, but brick by brick. He started small. A conversation with his mother about his childhood. A moment with his partner where, instead of hiding his stress, he admitted, I feel like I'm failing and I don't know what to do. No breakdowns, no drama, just quiet truth. And you know what happened? His relationships deepened. His confidence didn't collapse, it expanded. Because he no longer had to pretend. The fear of vulnerability, it turns out, wasn't protecting him, it was limiting him. The Stoics offer us a profound gift here. The ability to face fear not by brute force, but by clarity. To understand that the voice telling you don't share that is not the voice of truth. It's the echo of old wounds. And your job, as a seeker of wisdom, is not to obey the echo. It is to listen beyond it. To find the silence underneath and ask, what do I really need in this moment? What would love choose here? What would truth say? There's a passage from Marcus Aurelius that resonates deeply here. He wrote, when you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. To love. Not to dominate, not to hide. To love. And you cannot love if you cannot be known. You cannot be known if you never reveal yourself. So, why does vulnerability terrify us? Because it threatens the identity we've built around being impenetrable. Because it calls out the part of us that believes love must be earned through silence. And because it demands that we feel, deeply, unapologetically, without guarantee of return. But here's the truth you already know, deep down. Nothing of worth comes without risk. And the risk of being seen is far smaller than the cost of never being known. The Stoic doesn't seek safety. He seeks clarity. And when clarity reveals that your silence has become a prison, the only courageous act left is to speak. Not with a shout, not with drama, but with steady, vulnerable, radical honesty. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Number 3, the bridge between souls. Vulnerability as the heart of real intimacy. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast canyon. On the other side is someone you love, a partner, a friend, maybe even a parent. Between you stretches silence, distance, a history of half-truths and mischances. You want to reach them. You want to be seen, held, understood. But the only way across is vulnerability. The Stoics may not have spoken about intimacy in the language we use today, but they understood connection better than most. Marcus Aurelius often wrote not about conquest, but about conscience, about the ties between souls, the threads of virtue that bind human beings together in mutual understanding. And what is intimacy, if not the act of allowing someone to truly see you, without defense, without design? Vulnerability, when practiced with integrity, becomes the bridge. Not a collapse of boundaries, but a conscious lowering of the drawbridge. An invitation, a gesture that says, you may enter if you come with care. In our culture, we often think of intimacy as something physical, something romantic. But real intimacy is emotional. It is spiritual. It is the courage to reveal not just what you do, but who you are. Not just what you think, but what you fear. And in doing so, You allow the other person to do the same. A relationship without vulnerability is like a statue, beautiful, perhaps, but lifeless. No movement, no growth, just the illusion of connection carved in stone. But when vulnerability enters, so does breath. So does warmth. The statue becomes a living thing, shaped not by perfection, but by presence. Seneca once wrote, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." What if we replace the word kindness with connection? Vulnerability is how that opportunity is seized, not through grand declarations, but through small truths, shared often, shared honestly. Let's make this real. Think about a time someone opened up to you. Really opened up. They admitted something painful. They told you they were scared. They trusted you with their story. In that moment, did you see them as weak? Or did you feel closer to them than ever before? Now flip it. Think about a time you did the same. The moment you shared something you'd kept hidden. Perhaps your hands trembled. Perhaps your voice cracked. But when you finally spoke, something shifted. Not just in the relationship, but in you. Because the truth had been spoken aloud. And once that happens, it no longer controls you. There's a reason real vulnerability often brings tears. It's not sadness, it's release. It's the soul saying, "Thank you for finally letting me breathe." But vulnerability doesn't mean dumping your pain on others or using emotions to manipulate. The Stoics were clear, everything in moderation, guided by reason. Vulnerability, when rooted in virtue, is not about oversharing. It's about honest sharing. It's not about blurting out every wound. It's about knowing which truths, when spoken, can build bridges instead of walls. Epictetus warned, "Be careful whom you confide in," not as a call to isolation, but as a call to discernment. Vulnerability must be chosen with wisdom, offered to those who have earned our trust, not demanded from those who haven't. In intimacy, this means creating space for vulnerability, not just in ourselves, but in others. It means listening, not to respond, but to understand. It means asking, not "How are you?" but "What's real for you right now?" And being ready to hold what they give us. Not fix it, not judge it, but hold it. This is where intimacy deepens. Not through perfect moments, but through truthful ones. I remember a couple, together for nearly 20 years, who said the moment that changed their relationship wasn't a grand vacation or romantic gesture. It was a single night at the kitchen table. The husband looked up and said, "I don't feel like myself lately, and I'm scared I don't know how to talk to you about it." His wife, silent for a moment, reached out and replied, "I've been waiting for you to say that. I haven't felt like myself either." No solutions, just truth. And in that moment, they began again, not from scratch, but from soul. This is the power of vulnerability. It turns endings into beginnings. It melts resentment into understanding. It brings intimacy not just to romantic love, but to friendship, to family, even to strangers. And most importantly, it brings us back to ourselves. You see, intimacy isn't just about being seen by others. It's about no longer hiding from the mirror. Vulnerability is how you return home to your own heart. The Stoics might not have used the word intimacy, but their lives, their writings, are filled with it. Marcus spoke tenderly of his children, his mentors, his own failings. Seneca wrote letters of profound emotional depth. Epictetus reminded his students that nature has given us one tongue and two ears, that we may hear from others twice as much as we speak. That's intimacy. That's vulnerability. That's wisdom. So the next time you're tempted to close off, to offer the polished version of yourself instead of the real one, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, is this armor protecting me or imprisoning me? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can say to someone is not, "I love you." It's "Here I am." And that, my friend, is the true beginning of everything worth having. Number 4, emotional discipline. Stoic practices to strengthen vulnerability. True vulnerability is not chaos. It is not an emotional flood that drowns you or those around you. Real vulnerability, like all things Stoic, is ordered, introspective, intentional. It requires courage, yes, but also discipline. And that's where many people misunderstand it. Vulnerability is not the absence of control, it is the presence of clarity. To be vulnerable and grounded at the same time is a skill. A skill the Stoics, in their quiet wisdom, taught not through modern therapy, but through timeless practices. anchors of the soul that can steady us in turbulent moments and soften us in those that call for openness. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote as if whispering back to his own soul. His reflections weren't lofty, they were raw, human, honest. He wrestled with fear, failure, fatigue. Yet he did not collapse into emotion. He met it with structured inquiry. That's what journaling offered him, a mirror to the mind. This is the first Stoic practice we reclaim, daily self-examination. You don't need to write volumes. Just a few moments each evening to ask yourself, what did I feel today? Where did I hide? What truth did I avoid? In doing so, you begin to cultivate emotional literacy. You name what you feel. You understand its root. And slowly, the unknown becomes known, and what is known can be held without fear. Next is the practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. This is not pessimism. It's emotional preparedness. The Stoics would visualize future difficulties, not to dwell in dread, but to lessen the shock of emotional turbulence when it inevitably arrived. Vulnerability, after all, is a form of exposure. If you're going to be emotionally seen, you must also be emotionally resilient. Imagine you're about to have a hard conversation with someone you love. You fear their reaction. You fear rejection. Instead of suppressing those fears or letting them dictate silence, sit quietly and walk through the discomfort in your mind. What's the worst that might happen? Could you survive it? What would remain in your control? This practice allows you to enter vulnerable moments not as a trembling child, but as a prepared soul. And then, there is the evening review, a simple yet sacred Stoic ritual. Before you sleep, pause. Reflect, not to judge yourself, but to know yourself. Ask, where today did I live with honesty? Where did I avoid the truth out of fear? What would I choose differently tomorrow? The goal here is not perfection. It is progression. Each night, you carve away a little more of the false self and move closer to what is real. But even beyond these practices lies something more subtle, the art of temperance. The Stoics revered it as one of the cardinal virtues. In the context of vulnerability, it means sharing your heart without spilling your pain onto others. It means being honest, but not overwhelming. Raw, but not reckless. You can be open without being unfiltered. You can feel deeply without drowning in emotion. This balance, the sweet spot between expression and stability, is what Stoic vulnerability looks like. It's not silence. It's not oversharing. It's grounded truth. Let me offer you an image. Picture a river, steady in its current. It moves with force, with purpose, but it does not overflow its banks. It does not destroy the land around it. That's emotional discipline. That's what we aim for, not emotional suppression, but emotional structure. And it's worth noting, this kind of structure does not mean emotional coldness. In fact, it allows for deeper warmth. When you're anchored in your practices, when you've sat with your own truth enough times, you're no longer afraid of being seen. You no longer need to defend, deflect, or dominate. You can simply be present, attuned, real. I once knew a man, quiet, thoughtful, rarely the loudest in the room. But when he spoke, there was weight in his words. One night, he said to his partner, "I've always been afraid to disappoint you, so I hide parts of myself. But I'm tired of hiding. I want you to know all of me, not just the parts one think are acceptable." There were no tears, no drama, just calm truth. That moment changed everything in their relationship. You see, vulnerability doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a whisper that says, "I'm here." But it's a whisper that only arises when you've practiced meeting your inner world with honesty, day after day, moment after moment. This is the Stoic way, not avoiding pain, not amplifying it, but understanding it, holding it, using it to build character, not collapse. Seneca reminds us, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Vulnerability is one of today's greatest adversities, not because it wounds, but because it reveals. It asks you to stand without armor, to trust that your soul, not your mask, is what makes you worthy. And the more you practice, the less afraid you become. Not because it's easy, but because you're ready. You've trained for this. You've journaled through your storms. You've visualized discomfort. You've reflected at day's end. You've held your truth long enough that it no longer shakes in your hand. That, my friend, is Stoic vulnerability. Not performance, not fragility, but steady strength, spoken with heart, delivered with clarity, and carried with discipline. Number 5. The balance between boundaries and openness. Vulnerability, as powerful as it is, becomes dangerous when untethered from wisdom. Because being open does not mean being boundaryless. And being real does not mean letting others run wild in the sacred landscape of your heart. The Stoics, known for their stillness and strength, understood this tension long before we named it. Epictetus said, "Be careful to whom you confide your secrets. The world is full of listeners, not all of them wise." It wasn't a call to coldness, but to discernment. There's a difference between being open-hearted and being exposed, between allowing someone into your truth and letting them trample through it. Boundaries are not walls. They are the architecture of intimacy. Without them, vulnerability is no longer a gift. It becomes a leak, a slow, draining flood that leaves you depleted, confused, and sometimes broken. To walk the Stoic path is to understand this, that emotional clarity demands structural integrity. You must know where your lines are, what you will share, with whom, and why. Think of vulnerability like a flame. When protected, it warms a room. When uncontrolled, it burns it down. The Stoics were not afraid of fire, but they knew it needed a hearth, a container. So too must your emotional truth be held within the frame of intention. Too often in the name of authenticity, we overshare. We bleed into spaces that have not earned our story. We confuse transparency with wisdom. But the Stoic approach teaches us that not everyone deserves every part of you. Not because you're hiding, but because you're honoring what is sacred. Let's make this real. Imagine you're in a new relationship. Early on, there's a temptation to lay it all out, to tell every painful story, every secret, every struggle. You think, if they're going to love me, they need to know everything now. But that's not love. That's a test. That's a protective maneuver disguised as honesty. The wiser approach, the Stoic approach, is to pace intimacy, to share in layers, to observe whether the other person listens with care, responds with presence, and holds what you give them with gentleness. Only then do you go deeper. Not because you're afraid, but because you understand that trust is built, not assumed. And sometimes, boundaries mean saying no. No to one-sided conversations where you're always the one opening up. No to relationships that demand your pain but never offer theirs. No to the idea that being vulnerable means being constantly available. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. But I must be convinced." This is the Stoic commitment to reason, not reaction. Boundaries are rooted in the same principle, not in stubbornness, but in self-awareness. A Stoic doesn't lock themselves away emotionally, but neither do they hand over their soul like a free sample. They know their inner world is sacred, and sacred things are not meant for public consumption. Boundaries also protect your capacity to give. Without them, you burn out. You start to resent the very people you opened up to, not because they hurt you, but because you overextended. You gave beyond what you had the strength to sustain. Vulnerability, when forced or rushed, breeds regret. But vulnerability guided by Stoic boundaries, that breeds respect, both from others and from yourself. Now here's where it gets subtle. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you become cold or detached. It means your warmth has direction. Your truth has purpose. Your heart remains soft, but your backbone stays strong. I once worked with a woman, we'll call her Emily, who was the definition of openness. She shared deeply, often, and with everyone. At first, it felt freeing. But over time, she found herself exhausted. People would come to her with their pain, but few stayed to hold hers. She felt invisible in her own vulnerability. When we spoke, I asked her, what if your truth is a garden, not a broadcast? What if it's something people are invited into, rather than something shouted from the street corner? That reframing changed her. She started noticing who listened with depth, who asked instead of assumed, who gave, not just took. And slowly, she began to set boundaries, not out of fear, but out of reverence for her own soul. The result? Her relationships didn't shrink. They deepened, because now her vulnerability came with presence, with discernment, with grace. This is the Stoic wisdom we so often miss in today's emotional culture. You are not obligated to be endlessly accessible. You are not required to expose your wounds for the comfort of others. Vulnerability, to have meaning, must be offered, not extracted. So, How do you begin setting boundaries while remaining open? Start by listening to your body. Notice when you feel drained after a conversation. That's data. Pay attention to who holds space for your truth versus who hijacks it. Watch where your words land. Do they build bridges, or do they disappear into disinterest? And above all, check your own intention. Are you sharing to connect or to be rescued? Are you opening up because it's true, or because you're afraid of being abandoned if you don't? The Stoics teach us that everything we do must align with our highest self, not our wounds. Vulnerability rooted in wounds becomes performance, but vulnerability rooted in virtue becomes power. So protect that power. Guard your soul without closing it. Speak your truth, but only to those who can hear it. And when you sense the need for space, honor that space, not as rejection, but as restoration. As Epictetus said, keep your will in harmony with nature. And your nature, dear one, was never meant to be endlessly exposed. It was meant to be whole, wise, disciplined, free. Number 6, knowing thyself. The role of self-acceptance in vulnerability. Before we can be vulnerable with others, we must first face the most intimate and often most terrifying encounter of all, being vulnerable with ourselves. This is where most journeys break. Not because we don't want connection, not because we're incapable of emotional truth, but because we're strangers in our own inner world. We knock on every door hoping to be understood, while ignoring the one door that matters most, the one that leads inward. The Stoics knew this well. Socrates, whose influence permeates Stoic thought, famously said, "Know thyself." To the Stoics, self-knowledge wasn't a luxury, it was a moral obligation. Because how can a person live with virtue, choose wisely, or speak with integrity if they don't know what lies inside them? This is where vulnerability begins. With the self, we spend years, sometimes decades, building defenses, identities shaped by praise and pain, by reward and rejection. We become the strong one, the quiet one, the one who never complains. These personas may protect us for a time, but eventually they become prisons. And the cost? Intimacy, peace, clarity. To embrace vulnerability is to ask, who am I beneath all this? Not who the world expects, not who you perform as, but who you are when the performance stops, when the masks come off, when the room is empty and the mirror is still. Self-acceptance isn't about liking every part of yourself. It's about no longer lying to yourself. It's looking at your flaws, your wounds, your patterns, and saying, yes, this is mine, and I can still choose to love myself through it. The Stoic path is not one of perfection, but of presence. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations as a public journal. He wrote them to wrestle with himself. He admitted his failures, his impatience, his ego, and in doing so, he became free, not because he was flawless, but because he stopped running. When you stop running from yourself, you stop fearing exposure. Vulnerability becomes less about risk and more about alignment. You're not sharing to be accepted, you're sharing because you've already accepted yourself. Think of it like this. If you hand someone a map to a city you've never visited, you can't guide them. But if you've walked every street, explored every alley, faced every shadow, then when you hand over that map, it's with confidence. You know the territory. Vulnerability is the same. The deeper your self-awareness, the safer it feels to be seen. This journey inward often starts with discomfort. You sit down in silence, and what rises is not peace, but restlessness, shame, regret, doubt. These are not signs you're broken. They're signs you're healing. The Stoics teach us to stay with that discomfort, not to be consumed by it, but to learn from it. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." Vulnerability asks you to unlearn your illusions, to surrender your image, to tell the truth, not just out loud, but internally. I am afraid. I am angry. I feel unworthy. These admissions are not weakness. They are strength in bloom. Because once you name them, you can work with them. You can transform them. Self-acceptance also means honoring your own pace. Not every story needs to be told today. Not every emotion needs to be shared right now. The Stoics remind us to practice temperance, not just in speech, but in timing. Be honest with yourself about what you're ready to explore. Vulnerability is not a race. It's a relationship, one you build with yourself day by day. And as you deepen that relationship, something shifts. You stop needing validation from others because you've already given it to yourself. You stop over-explaining your pain because you've already made peace with it. You stop seeking permission to be whole because you already know you always were. I once met a young man, we'll call him Theo, who had spent most of his life pretending to be what others needed. Confident, funny, capable, but underneath, he felt like a fraud. Every compliment felt like pressure. Every relationship, a performance. One day, in a quiet conversation, he said, "I don't even know what I want anymore. I've been so busy becoming what others love, I forgot who I am." That moment wasn't weakness. It was the start of everything. From there, he began journaling, reflecting, saying no more often, sitting with his fears, not as enemies, but as teachers. And slowly, he began to reconnect with himself, not the image, but the man. He didn't become louder. He didn't become tougher. He became clearer, softer, in the best way. And as he accepted himself, his relationships changed. They became more honest, less exhausting, more real. That's the power of self-acceptance. It makes vulnerability sustainable, because when you no longer need to hide from yourself, you stop hiding from everyone else. The Stoic life isn't about avoiding emotion. It's about understanding it, holding it, choosing your response. And in this practice of self-inquiry, vulnerability stops being something you do. It becomes something you are. A presence that walks into a room and doesn't need to prove itself. A calm voice that speaks truth without shaking. A soul that no longer seeks rescue because it's already come home. And when that happens, when you've sat with yourself long enough to say, "I know who I am," then you'll find that the deepest intimacy starts within. Vulnerability is not surrender, it is self-mastery. So here we are, having walked this path together, from ancient wisdom to modern wounds, from the armor we wear to the truths we hide. And if there's one truth left echoing in your mind, let it be this. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is not falling apart. It is the quietest kind of strength, the most human form of courage, the kind of power that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't seek applause, but simply stands in the light, uncovered, unashamed. The Stoics knew that to master the self was not to become invincible, but to become honest. Vulnerability, in their eyes, was not a threat to character, but a testament to it. It was how we showed the gods, the world, and most of all ourselves, that we are unafraid of being seen, because we have nothing left to run from. Seneca wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." And I say, so is to feel deeply, to sit in your own soul and not flinch, to say, "I love you," even when you don't know what comes next, to say, "I'm struggling," without adding, "but I'm fine," to open your heart and let someone see not just the polished version of you, but the whole you. This is not weakness. This is mastery. And if you've made it to the end of this video, it tells me something about you, that you're not afraid of truth, that you're ready to live with depth, not noise, that you're here not for surface motivation, but for something timeless, something still, something true. So take these words not as advice, but as a mirror. Reflect on them. Sit with them. Ask yourself, where have I armored up out of fear? Where have I traded connection for performance? Where have I mistaken silence for strength? And then make one small shift. Just one. Speak one honest sentence today. Pause for one moment of reflection tonight. Offer one truth to someone who has earned it. That's how it starts. One vulnerable act at a time. One layer removed. One breath deeper. And in time, you will feel it. The softening of the shoulders, the quiet of the mind, the gentle return of your own voice. Because to be vulnerable is not to be weak. It is to be awake. It is to walk through this world, not with armor, but with awareness. Not with fear, but with virtue. Not alone, but profoundly, unshakably human. If this message has stirred something in you, let it stay. Let it grow. And when you're ready, share it. With someone who needs to hear it. With someone who forgot that they are allowed to feel. And if this video brought you even a little more clarity, a little more stillness, or a little more strength, I invite you to like it. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below with what resonated most. Not because I need it, but because somewhere, someone else might see your words and feel a little less alone. That is the quiet power of this community, of Stoic Now, where we don't run from emotion, we meet it with wisdom. And we don't seek perfection, we seek peace. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, walk gently, speak truth, and stay open. Your soul is not something to hide. It is something to come home to.